coming to class one of what I'm calling Bedrock 2021, because we've done this before, but it's been with COVID and everything else going on. It's been at least a couple years since we've done this, and so I've updated it and done some different things, so I hope you enjoy it. A couple things on your tables. Gabe passed around little index cards. If there are questions that you have during the class that we don't cover, okay, wait until the end of class, and if we haven't covered them, then write them down on that index card and just leave them on the table as you go. Okay, I want to make sure that I get a chance to answer all your questions, but if we went individually, it would take forever. So I'll take the questions, put them together, get the answers, and then at the beginning of class next week, we'll just do a quick touch on all of those questions, okay? That's not to say we can't go back and forth during the class, but it'll be more straightforward if we kind of just keep going, all right? So, let me tell you what Bedrock is, okay? I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm going to tell you what it's not, okay? The purpose of doing this, bless you, is, number one, it's just for fellowship, right? Just to get together. How many people go typically to the 9 a.m. service? Okay, how many go to the 11 a.m. service? Do you guys recognize one another? A lot of you is like, I've never seen that person. And yet you've been going here for years, right? So this is a good time to get everybody together. But I'll tell you what it's not going to be. If you're expecting a fire hose of teaching, and I know I've been guilty from time to time, fire hose teaching, it's not going to be that. Okay, it's not. There's going to be valuable things that we talk about. There will be teaching, but it's not going to be that. It's not. The class is not designed to answer your every question that there will ever be. Okay, I don't know that anybody can ever do that. And it's not going to be a seminary level deep dive into really complex issues. That's not what this class is for. Okay, here's what the class is. It is a discussion designed to get you thinking. Get you thinking. The best way to know what you truly believe is to have to think about, why do I believe that? Right? A lot of us have been Christians for our whole lives. Some of us are not even Christians yet. Some of us brand new Christians. So we've got everybody in this class represented, all different parts of the spectrum. And so, if you had to answer that question to somebody, if you've been a Christian your whole life, you go, oh, I know that, and I get it why. But in some cases, the longer you've been a Christian, or the longer you've been anything, the more you start taking for granted some of the things that are just baseline knowledge. Like, I thought everybody knew that, right? In church, we call that speaking in Christianese. I do the best I can because of my personal background. I do the best I can to avoid that, and when I catch myself in it, I try and correct it or explain it. Some of it is necessary. It helps us as a body together understand we're on the same page, and if we use this term or that term, we all kind of know what it means. But I don't want to make any assumptions. And then it goes even further when you're talking about theological ideas. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why do you believe this or that? And if we don't get a chance to talk about it, sometimes the answer is just like, we've always done it like that. Okay, why do we do it like that? And it's okay if we're talking amongst ourselves. What if you're talking to somebody who doesn't know Christ? And they say, why do you use oil when you pray for somebody? Or why do you even pray? What's that all about? And they have all these questions, and if we don't know, we just kind of always have. We want to be able to explain those things, okay? So, and it's going to help us. So what it is that, designed to get you thinking. It's going to be an overview of what we believe and what we teach here at Discover. So by going through all these 8 weeks, we're going to hit a lot of different subjects. And there isn't going to be then, I had no idea that Discover was a charismatic church. I said this last weekend during my message, and I saw a lot of people go like, wait, what did he say? I know that happens. But I want to talk about that so that we understand, right? It's going to be a time of fellowship. It's going to be a time of discipleship. What do I mean by a time of discipleship? The discussion time in the tables. Discipleship is just sharing what you know about Christ with someone else, helping them in their journey, in their walk. And so if I say something and then you're having a table discussion, just simply the act of turning to the person next to you and going, well, I think what it means is this. And here's how this will... I used to think it meant this, and now it means that. That's discipleship. We overcomplicate these things all the time into some grand thing. It's just helping one another. That's what it is. It's going to ultimately be a collection of tools that should help us all fulfill the Great Commission of Jesus. Is there anybody who doesn't know what the Great Commission of Jesus is? You don't have to raise your hand. But if you don't, this class is especially for you. We're going to talk about that. That's one of those things, those phrases that can be considered churchy. We just say that and we assume everybody knows what we're talking about. We'll get into those kind of things, okay? We're going to use as little churchy language as possible. If I say something that has churchy language in it, I want you to feel free. Not only feel free, I want to encourage you to call me on it. What is that? What's that mean? Okay? And not if it's every other word. It's judicious. I want to get through the class. But I want to make sure that there's nothing in the language. We were kind of joking at the table about preaching in Latin. Some churches still do that. And there's no desire there to make sure that the word is clear and the meaning is clear. And that anybody can actually walk out and what the word says is how you're going to know unless you know Latin. So we're going to eliminate that as much as we can. So, any questions so far? Good. Then I'm doing all right so far. Let's get into it. Okay, the first thing we're going to do, we've got that first video we're going to hit. And this is a video, I'm going to put about 4 or 5 different videos throughout the class. And the idea is just to kind of break things up. And there's also, sometimes videos can just crystallize an idea or a thought in a way that maybe we couldn't. Gabe, it's the one, Pulse of the World on God. Gabe's going to get her exercise here tonight, running back and forth.
Put it this way, I'd like to think that God is real, for one reason or the other.
I don't believe in God because the idea that an omniscient, loving being would judge me, who is mortal and ignorant and tiny, for all eternity based on a few years' experience, I find to be rather a cruel thought.
Look at everything around us, from the universe to our being to the ability to have consciousness. I think that it can only be explained by God.
All the power that God has, He, she, it has given to me. So we're definitely one.
I hope there's something else out there. It'd be fun to experience whatever God has in store next. Either that or we're all just evolved apes.
There's so many things where it's just like that couldn't have just happened. Like that has to have something behind it, and I believe that something's God. For all we know, it could be aliens. I have no idea, to be honest.
I was raised atheist. I don't believe in a higher power, but I also don't claim to know everything about the world, and I think maybe it's a bit arrogant for people to try and believe they know the truth to anything.
For me, yes, it's obvious. There are like so many things. For me personally, so many things that I've been through, and after that, I'm like, well, that had to be God.
The pat answer is that how can there be no God when there's all this beauty around us? But I think about evolution and science and all of that kind of thing and think, how can you not just accept it the way it is?
I really don't know what to believe, to be quite honest, so it's kind of just really just living it day by day and just trying to be a really good person.
I don't know. I don't know if there is one. I just pretend, I guess, and hope that there's something else out there.
All right. Pretend and hope doesn't sound like an excellent plan. So I want to throw out this question. There's going to be a lot of table discussions, okay? And at the end of the table discussions, I'm going to ask for somebody to speak up and just tell us kind of what you guys talked about. So let's take 5 minutes right now and talk about this question. Is there a God? And why does it matter what we think either way? Let's take 5 minutes and talk about that at the tables. Okay. All right, so everybody have some good conversations. It sounds like it. I walked around and I liked what I was hearing. Let's, since you guys got to go first for the meal, let's have you go first for what you come up with. What are some of the things you talked about at the table?
So we talked about how like
You don't have to. Come right up here.
we talked about basically the difference of like your outlook on the world of like if you think there is a God or if there isn't. Like if you think there isn't a God, then everything just kind of seems like meaningless. Like there's not really any purpose because this is like you're just here by accident and then you're gone after. So like there's not really a purpose in being here at all because none of it matters. But when you have God, it's like there's this grand purpose and he's like, here it is, it's so obvious, like do these things with your life and you will find fulfillment. And then there's something even grander afterwards with him.
Okay. Do you think people are wired to have a purpose? That just like innately people need to have a purpose?
Yeah.
And so if you go through your life without purpose, or at least without a bigger purpose than outside of yourself, how do you think that would affect your mood, your everyday?
Like without God, I think people try and find like temporary purposes throughout their life. Like they're like, I'm gonna do this for this part of my life until like and Daniel was talking about like we live to work and we work to live. And then we spend the rest of our lives doing like fun things. Or we try and, you know, fill our lives with as many things as we can while we're still here. But it's just, it's all temporary. There's no sense of like eternity because you're just going to die. Nothing.
That's good. That's good. All right. How about you guys?
Yeah.
Take turns.
We bounced around from a couple different points from him saying this. He's challenged some coworkers or atheists with the idea of this is, where does the good side of humanity come from? Where does morality come from? If there isn't God, how do you explain things to just the personal side of it? And just, it matters because of our personal relationship and having it that power and that effort. I'm just saying more generally, if I try to think about how I present to someone that didn't know God, it matters in the sense that if there is, from my perspective, there is someone that created this, then certainly they have intention for it in theory, and I want to know what that was and I want to be aligned to that.
That's good. I like that. If somebody created all this, there has to be a reason for it. Yeah, not everything is chance then. What about you guys? Your spokesman left, so it's on you guys.
So the one conversation Ron was just talking about, was it a relative?
Sister-in-law.
A sister-in-law, who believes that we're just all one. And so Rhonda, when she lost her son and her husband, so her sister-in-law says, "So where are they?" Well, I said, "Well, they're in heaven." Well, how do you know that? And and then I think you asked the question. So what happens when you die? And she goes, well, there's my heaven pointing to the mountains into the truth. Right? And there's no purpose other than being a good person. Right. And so kind of along back here. So if there is actually a God, and what deeper purpose and deeper meanings are behind that? Because otherwise, the whole purpose is to be a good person. Or you define what do we say? You sort of define your reality. You define your purpose. And I think we ended up with a concept of control. So hey, you can't define my purpose. That's my purpose. I don't care if there's no God, then it's my purpose, and that's just what it is. So God defines a whole bunch.
And if there's no defined purpose that as a society you agree on, then what happens? Then it's just chaos if you're just trying to make it to the end of your life one way or another, right? Okay, good. What about you guys?
So I think it's that same principle. Like, if you don't believe in God, then where is the accountability and morality? Like, where's the check and balances? If you don't have any kind of accountability for your behavior, then there's kind of chaos. But people find these little ways to kind of justify it. I was explaining, I have a friend that went from atheism to Catholicism. And for her, the justification was is that she wasn't finding that structure that she needed as an atheist. So she liked the Catholic Church because everything was laid out for her in a way where she could say, this is the path I'm following, this is what I have to do, these are the rules I have to follow. So I feel like a lot of the time when people don't want to believe in a higher power, it has to do with their accountability. They don't want to be held accountable to an end game here if everything in your life and your actions and behaviors eventually get, put in front of someone to say, hey, you did good or you did bad. They don't want to think about that. So it's easier to kind of justify behaviors, lifestyles, if you don't believe in higher power. So.
Very good. All right, over here.
I'll go, yeah. So we said, yes, there is a God. At least the 11 o'clockers.
9 o'clockers aren't waking up.
So that's evidence through science and nature, and the last one who said, just try to be a good person. Well, where is that compass set? That's been set somewhere. And the reason it's important is because we're returning to the The Bible says that whosoever believes and there were some other things said, so
The spokesman gets to define.
There were some other good ideas.
All right, well, good. Good, so that's, all great points, not necessarily answers. I don't know if there's one specific answer, but many good points and many good things for us to think about. I have just a follow-up question. If there's not a God, how did we even get here? If there's not a God, how do we get here? Anybody think about that? We're not going to necessarily do table discussions, but anybody have, if you're a follower of Christ, you know how you think we got here. But what are some of the things that you've heard other people say? Like, how did mankind get here? How do we get here to where we are today if there is no God?
Well, Big Bang.
Evolution.
I would say.
Yeah.
Big Bang.
The Big Bang is probably the most common, I think, like just out of nowhere, the perfect, combination of science.
Evolution, right? Coming from amoebas and all the way up.
Pure accident.
What's that?
Pure accident.
Pure accident.
Yeah.
It's seeded by aliens is the latest one.
Seeded by aliens. That's a theory I've heard before.
Technology.
Yeah. What's that? Who put the alien? If it was seeded by aliens, who put the aliens there? Good question. And they're all questions that require a little bit of thought to come up with an answer. We all know as Christians what we've been told. We know what Scripture says, and we'll talk about that through all these classes. But I want to show you a video. Gabe, it's Eric Metaxas. Is God dead? This is a 5-minute video, so get comfortable.
1966, Time magazine ran a cover story asking, "Is God dead?" The cover reflected the fact that many people had accepted the cultural narrative that God is obsolete, that as science progresses, there's less need for a God to explain the universe. It turns out, though, that the rumors of God's death were premature. In fact, perhaps the best arguments for his existence come from, of all places, science itself. Here's the story. The same year Time featured its now famous headline, the astronomer Carl Sagan announced that there were two necessary criteria for a planet to support life: the right kind of star and a planet the right distance from that star. Given the roughly octillion planets in the universe, that's one followed by 24 zeros, there should have been about septillion planets, that's one followed by 21 zeros, capable of supporting life. With such spectacular odds, scientists were optimistic that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, known by its initials SETI, an ambitious project launched in the 1960s, was sure to turn up something soon. With a vast radio telescopic network, scientists listened for signals that resembled coded intelligence. But as the years passed, the silence from the universe was deafening. As of 2014, researchers have discovered precisely bupkis, nada, zilch, which is to say zero followed by an infinite number of zeros. What happened? As our knowledge of the universe increased, it became clear that there were, in fact, far more factors necessary for life, let alone intelligent life, than Sagan supposed. His two parameters grew to 10, then 20, and then 50, which meant that the number of potentially life-supporting planets decreased accordingly. The number dropped to a few thousand planets and kept on plummeting. Even SETI proponents acknowledged the problem. Peter Schenkel wrote in a 2006 piece for Skeptical Inquirer, a magazine that strongly affirms atheism, "In light of new findings and insights, we should quietly admit that the early estimates may no longer be tenable." Today, there are more than 200 known parameters necessary for a planet to support life, every single one of which must be perfectly met or the whole thing falls apart. For example, without a massive gravity-rich planet like Jupiter nearby to draw away asteroids, Earth would be more like an interstellar dartboard than the verdant orb that it is. Simply put, the odds against life in the universe are astonishing. Yet, here we are, not only existing, but talking about existing. What can account for it? Can every one of those many parameters have been perfectly met by accident? At what point is it fair to admit that it is science itself that suggests that we cannot be the result of random forces? Doesn't assuming that an intelligence created these perfect conditions in fact require far less faith than believing that a life-sustaining Earth just happened to beat the inconceivable odds? But wait, there's more. The fine-tuning necessary for life to exist on a planet is nothing compared with the fine-tuning required for the universe to exist at all. For example, astrophysicists now know that the values of the four fundamental forces, gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, were determined less than 1/millionth of a second after the Big Bang. Alter any one of these four values ever so slightly, and the universe as we know it could not exist. For instance, if the ratio between the strong nuclear force and the electromagnetic force had been off by the tiniest fraction of the tiniest inconceivable fraction, then no stars could have formed at all. Multiply that single parameter by all the other necessary conditions, and the odds against the universe existing are so heart-stoppingly astronomical that the notion that it all just happened defies common sense. It would be like tossing a coin and having it come up heads 10 quintillion times in a row. I don't think so. Fred Hoyle, the astronomer who coined the term Big Bang, said that his atheism was greatly shaken by these developments. One of the world's most renowned theoretical physicists, Paul Davies, has said that the appearance of design is overwhelming. Even the late Christopher Hitchens, one of atheism's most aggressive proponents, conceded that without question the fine-tuning argument was the most powerful argument of the other side. Oxford University professor of mathematics, Dr. John Lennox, has said, the more we get to know about our universe, the more the hypothesis that there is a creator gains in credibility as the best explanation of why we are here. The greatest miracle of all time is the universe. It is the miracle of all miracles, one that inescapably points to something or someone beyond itself. I'm Eric Metaxas for Prager University.
All right. What do you think? It's a lot of big numbers, isn't it? So I want to look at what the Bible has to say about this subject. Do I have anybody who will volunteer to read some scriptures for me? First one is in Job. So Job 38, verses 4 through 6. While you find that, I need somebody else in Psalms. Psalms, okay. Over here, Scott, Psalm 8, verses 3 and 4. And then one more person in Romans that can start getting it ready. Anybody? Okay. Romans 1:20. All right, Job 38, verses 4 through 6.
Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you know so much. Who determined its dimensions and stretched out the surveying line? What supports its foundations and who laid its cornerstone?
Okay, so that's it. And that is Job, as we taught, if you were here for that Job series, the oldest book of the Bible. It's not the first if we look at it in how it's written, but it is the oldest known book. And even back then, God was challenging Job. Okay, and they knew this. Psalm 8, 3 and 4. Who's got that? Scott?
When I consider your heavens, the works of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them?
I love that. Both of those written thousands of years ago, and they're both talking about the creation of the moons and the stars, foundations of the earth, those things that those people at that time would not have had any concept of that, and yet God did. Now, since the beginning of time and long before science, in quotation marks, was the gold standard of knowledge, mankind knew that there had to be something. Okay? They knew that there had to be something outside, something more than their eyes could see to all of this, and there were thousands of opinions, thousands of different reasons that they gave for that. Here's one. This is the Apostle Paul, Romans 1:20.
For his visible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. As a result, people are without excuse.
That's good. Gabe, we're about ready for the next video, too. So the question I have for you guys... I'm getting a little charge out of this, just so you know. I'm going to be honest and admit to you guys that. So can anybody... Yeah.
What were those three scriptures again besides Romans 1?
Job 38, verses 4 through 6.
Okay.
Psalm 8, 3 and 4. And then Romans 1:20. Next week, by the way, I will have a sheet. I apologize, I didn't have time today, but I'll have a sheet that will talk about all the scriptures that we used, and also have the links to all the videos that we're going to see. Okay, so you'll have that next week. We might even put it on social media or something if it makes it easier. So, can anyone really know for sure that there is or isn't a God? How could you, with any great amount of faith that we have, the scriptures, anything that we have, cool videos, can you stand in front of somebody and say, I absolutely know without a shadow of a doubt, there is no questioning that there is a God? Can you? Just mull that over in your head. Let's watch this next video. This one is called, it's from a TEDx talk. It's called Science versus God. This one is 13 minutes, so be ready. But it's a good video. I wouldn't show it to you if it wasn't that good.
What is really real? Is the ground really here? we say that objects like the ground are composed of molecules, and those molecules are composed of atoms. Here's a simple illustration of the atom. You can see that in the center is the nucleus, and that has protons and neutrons. And around the nucleus are electrons. But you might also notice there's some void space or empty space in this atom. Can you estimate the percentage of void space in an atom? It's 99.9% void space. And actually, there's 13 nines after that decimal point. So the ground seems solid, seems like it's here, but it's nearly 100% nothing. Same goes for this stage, the seats, this whole auditorium. You know, and I know that in pop culture, they like to tell you that you're significant and you're a somebody, but in modern science, you're pretty much nothing. Tell that to your psychiatrist. Everybody has their own view of reality, whether a scientist, a philosopher, or a theologian. You see, philosophers and theologians, they debate abstract ideas, kind of like myself, and we wonder, what practical impact are they having on our day-to-day lives? And then we see scientists, like myself, and we're seemingly dispassionate people, and we sit in our labs and we do experiments. And we wonder, what contribution are we having to the deeper meaning of life? You see, I'm someone who holds graduate degrees in both science and theology. And I seek the nexus of both science and God, so that I'm neither dispassionate nor impractical. Famous scientist Sir Isaac Newton seemed to be able to put together these ideas. And he said the most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. But sadly, we have drifted from this point of view. You see, simply what I believe is that science and God, as I have understood them, go together. They're integrated. And even more so, with the advent of modern science in the last 100 years or so, it's actually helped us make some connections of those seemingly mystical qualities about God. I'd like to give you 3 examples to illustrate this. First one is probability. Probability in modern science is this interesting thing. You see, pretty much everything has a probability, whether it's the normal or the really unusual. Let me give you an example of one of those unusual things. You see, if we take the atom again, the atom, there's actually a probability that a particle in the atom can leave the atom and at the same time violate the law of conservation of energy. Now, the law of conservation of energy says that energy is neither created nor destroyed. Yet a particle in the atom, without having the energy to do so, and no available energy, can overcome an energy barrier and just leave. That's the weirdness of probability. Now, why is this interesting theologically? Well, theologically, we wonder, well, how can God act in these seemingly miraculous ways? I mean, isn't it just magic and myth? For example, and there's plenty of them, God is described as omniscient, all-knowing outside of time, described as omnipresent, that is, everywhere present. And we wonder, how is this possible? But yet, what if there was a finite probability that God could act miraculously? And that's not impossible. And what if there's a possibility that God doesn't overstep the bounds of science, but actually works within the bounds of nature and science? You see, what I'm saying is this. If modern science tells us there's a probability for unusual activity happening, and we're okay with that, then we should not be as surprised that God could act and do miraculous things. And there's still a probability for that. Now, I'd like to hone in on 2 of these things that I just mentioned, that of omniscience and omnipresence, and use this in our second 2 examples. So, next, the theory of relativity and our thought discussion of how that connects to omniscience. That is, God is outside of time and knowing all. Well, the theory of relativity came about in the 1900s by Einstein, and it's this theory that has been proven and described over and over throughout the decades. It has many facets, and the one we'll focus on is that between velocity and time. Simply said, the faster an object goes, the more lag in time you'll have. There's an interesting set of experiments that were done to illustrate this in 1971. They're the Hopple-Keating experiments. They took a couple cesium beam atomic clocks. These are really accurate clocks. And they synchronized them. And they placed one on the ground and one in a commercial airliner that flew around and then later landed on the ground. Well, what did they find? The clocks were no longer synchronized. They were actually off by an order of nanoseconds, and that could be calculated from the theory of relativity. Which one was behind in time? The one that traveled faster and that on the airliner and later returned to Earth. Well, this idea can be expanded such that the faster you go, the slower time goes, until you reach your apex at the universal speed limit. That's the speed of light. And you know, at the speed of light travels so fast that time actually no longer progresses. You see, time is not a factor for light. Or we might say light is outside of time. Well, that's weird, I know, but that's a theory of relativity. Why is this interesting theologically? Well, theologically, we know that God describes himself and is described as light. And yet we wonder, how could God be omniscient? That is, outside of time and knowing all. You see, if you consider God, we know he sees past, present, and future all at the same time and knows all. And that seems eerily similar and parallel to the idea that a photon can be outside of time. Now get me straight, I'm not saying that God is a photon. What I am saying is that in modern science, if it tells us that light can be outside of time, we should not be as surprised that God could be outside of time. Weird, I know, but let's keep going. Let's evaluate the third topic in modern science that I want to look at, and that's entanglement, and how that relates to the idea of omnipresence. Well, entanglement is this really interesting, strange idea that came about in 1935 by Einstein, Schrödinger, Rosen, and others. And let's say you have two particles, and they could really be photons, electrons, some molecules, various things. And if they're entangled or connected, a change in one will affect a change in another. Well, you think no big deal. But the interesting thing is you can separate them more and more and more, and they can still be entangled. See, distance doesn't seem to be a relevant factor. This reached the furthest limit I've seen in 2012, published in the Journal of Nature, where these two entities were separated by 143 kilometers. That's 88 miles, and they were still connected and interacting with each other. That was in the case of photon teleportation from one place to another, and that happened instantaneously. This was fictionalized in the TV and film series Star Trek, if you've heard of it. In Star Trek, they beam people up, and they're moving somebody from one place to another pretty much instantaneously, and the distance doesn't really matter. That's the idea of entanglement. Well, why is this interesting theologically? Theologically, we wondered, how could God be omnipresent? I mean, isn't that kind of weird? Well, if God is here and he's interacting with people, and those people could be separated at a distance from him all around the world, somehow he's doing that instantaneously all the time. This also seems weirdly similar to the idea of entanglement. Get me right. Again, I'm not saying that God's an entangled particle. What I'm saying is that if, in modern science, particles can interact with each other even while separated at a distance, we shouldn't be surprised that God can interact with humans Again, separated with a distance and doing that instantaneously. Well, you might ask, so what? So what? Well, again, I believe that science and God, as I've understood them, are totally interconnected and integrated. And I know you're going to say, wait a minute, proofs by analogy are not proofs. And I know that. What I'm saying is, these seemingly mystical qualities about God that we thought were magic actually have an interesting precedent in modern science. You've seen this Erlenmeyer flask of boiling water on stage here for the last 10 minutes or so. And so I ask you, why is the water boiling? Okay, no doubt, you're going to say that the heat from the hot clay is being transferred into the liquid water. As the temperature increases, the kinetic energy increases, exciting the liquids and the liquid molecules in that liquid state to go out to the vapor state. The vapor pressure increases until it reaches atmospheric pressure, at which point nucleation points within the glass allow bubbles to form, overcoming the enthalpy of vaporization, and thus it boils. Duh. But actually, what I tell you is no, that's not really why the water's boiling. The water's boiling because I want some tea. Love tea. Tea's really good. Which answer is the correct one? You see, we actually need both the science explanation and the deeper meaning explanation to get the fuller picture of reality. Each answer is incomplete without the other, and really insufficient without the other. And it causes us to have a smaller understanding of what the reality is. Einstein put it this way: science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. Now, I understand that Einstein didn't accept any conventional religion, for sure, but he was moved by some, quote, cosmic religious feeling. Many of you probably here today are academians or students, and you probably are focused on your academics, fields of study, and things like that, possibly without much regard to the deeper meanings of life. And what I'm saying is, maybe we're missing out on something. Maybe we need to work towards a reality that's a little bit bigger than that. So I ask you, what is really real?
I love that video. I hope you guys like it too. Lots of science. You can all seem super smart. It's important though that we don't look at science and religion as having to be exclusive. Anybody that wants to be a scientist by nature is told from the beginning, you can't think about theology. You can't think how religion would fit into this, and vice versa. You have to have a very open mind in order to be able to explore both, obviously as he did, and really be honest, with an honest look at it. And if you do that, and the more that you look at religion and the things of God and those questions that we have about God, the more you look at them from a scientific aspect, the more it opens up. The deeper you go, the more it opens up. It's not, well, if you just look at it quickly, it's okay, but the more you explore it, then it starts to fall apart. It's exactly the opposite. The more you get into it, the more clear it becomes, and the more obvious that it becomes that there has to be a God. So that's the point of showing you those science-y videos. But science alone is not going to reveal God to you. We've seen, or I've seen anyway, and I know many of you have, they build these super colliders. Right? And the idea of these super colliders is that they can, by accelerating a particle, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm probably botching this, but by accelerating a particle so fast and crashing it into another particle, they can get down to the nanosecond or fractions of a nanosecond to within the creation event. They call it the singularity. Right? They can get down and say, we're almost to that point of creation where we can prove that. Almost. It's always just almost. No matter how much they push the boundary and how many billions they spend and the latest technology and updates and all these things, It's just down to almost to that point. They still can't get down and say, okay, we can figure out how God created the world, the universe. We can recreate this in a lab. Can't get to that point. It's just amazing. It blows my mind. The deeper you go, the more you go into it. The more, if you're honest, you have to realize and admit that there is something beyond what we can know as human beings. Louis Giglio, a pastor, I love him. He's a famous pastor if you haven't heard of him, but he has this quote. He says, the only way for us to know if God exists is for him to reveal himself to us. That's really the only way that we're going to know. God has revealed himself to us in the form of his son, Jesus. Well, let's talk about Jesus. There's some more light party conversation. You guys are looking for a light party conversation. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about Jesus. I need some more volunteers, and I will throughout the night. Somebody to read out of 1 Corinthians. Somebody willing? Okay, Steph. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 17. And Gabe, after this will be our next video.
Immediately after. All right.
We didn't rehearse this part.
I'll pay for this later. 1 Corinthians 15, 17.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins.
If Christ had not been raised, your faith is futile. Gabe, go ahead and hit Pulse of the World on Jesus. This one's a little shorter, almost 3 minutes.
I'd like to think Jesus is a great person. It's to me, it's a silly story.
耶稣是神的儿子，他同时也是真神。
Jesus was the shepherd who basically was the leader of the pack and told people what to do.
He would probably be the guy that I walked by and thought he was a homeless bum and ignored him, honestly. I'm sure that he would be saying something really profound, and I'm afraid I might be ignoring it.
I don't necessarily believe that any one person is God. I don't think that Jesus may have been God. However, I do believe that we all have divinity within us.
I'm just trying to do the best I can down here. I believe that the teachings of Jesus, they ring true to me. It makes sense to live that way, to love people instead of hate people, to look out for your fellow man instead of always trying to beat him down.
Jesus wasn't white, so I don't think that you could say that he's just here for white middle class people.
If he really existed, also too bad that there is no other people like him nowadays.
Jesus, I believe, was a liberal. And I think looking at where we're going, I think he'd be happy to see that people are becoming more and more accepting.
Sure, I believe that Jesus was a historical person, but I don't believe that the other things that have accrued around the story of his life.
He's like the pinnacle of love.
It's idolization, basically. The idea that there's a human being that can be viewed as a god is a tough proposition for me to accept.
Jesus, he loves people and he wants people in his family, and he's not someone that pushes people outside. He's always inviting people in.
Si Jesus ay anak ng Diyos na namatay para sa atin, para tubusin tayo sa mga kasalanan at para makarating tayo sa langit.
I think I grow more curious about that every day, and how I can be a better person, maybe by following his teachings, and maybe it will be a fit for me, and maybe it won't, but I have a lifetime to figure that out.
have a lifetime to figure that out. Maybe.
Yeah, when you die, that's
All right, so discussion question. I'm going to throw this out to the tables again. So here we go. The question is, did Jesus exist? And if so, important second half of the question, did he do the things we've heard about him? 5 minutes.
Yes.